The air in the Topkapı Palace does not move so much as it breathes. A slow and rhythmic inhalation of salt-heavy mist from the Bosphorus and an exhalation of sandalwood, old parchment, and damp stone. If you listen closely, past the veil of centuries, the first sound you hear is the rhythmic, hollow click of leather-soled slippers against polished marble. Sound that defines the cadence of a life lived in transition. Above, the sky over Istanbul is turning the color of a bruised plum. The transition between night and the first grey hints of a 16th century dawn. The water of the Golden Horn laps against the sea walls with a persistent, low-frequency hum, a reminder that while the world outside is a chaos of trade, janissary marches, and shouting merchants, the world within these walls is governed by a profound, almost monastic silence. Tonight, we step away from the shimmering myths of the Orient that have been painted by distant observers who never stepped foot across the threshold. We are not looking for the sensational or the dramatic. Instead, we are looking for the truth found in the quietude, the slow, deliberate ticking of a life defined by hierarchy, education, and the immense weight of waiting. The Imperial Harem was not a place of chaotic luxury, but a meticulously oiled machine of statecraft and discipline, a house of felicity that functioned more like a prestigious finishing school or a cloistered university than the fantasies of the West would suggest. It was a place where power was measured in the rustle of a silk robe and the height of a doorway, where a woman's destiny was etched into the very tiles that lined her path. The light begins to filter through the kafesta, intricate wooden lattice that shield the windows, casting long, geometric shadows across the floors of the courtyard of the eunuchs. These shadows look like lace, or perhaps like the bars of a very beautiful cage, depending on the spirit of the one watching them. Our journey begins with a young girl, perhaps no older than 12, standing at the edge of this vast, echoing world. She has no name here yet. Her past has been folded away like a worn traveling cloak, stored in a corner of her mind that she must learn to visit less and less. She stands small against the towering walls of the palace, her fingers tracing the cold, glazed surface of an Eisnig tile. The tile is cool to the touch, decorated with a tulip that will never wither, its deep reds and cobalt blues as vibrant as the day they left the kiln. She remembers the journey, the rocking of the ship, the smell of salt and fear, the transition from the rugged mountains of her home to the sprawling golden city of the Sultan. But as she enters the harem, the scale of the world shifts. The horizon disappears, replaced by vaulted ceilings and endless corridors. The silence here is heavy. It is a disciplined silence. It is the sound of hundreds of women moving with a grace that has been practiced until it becomes second nature. There is no shouting, no hurried running. Everything is governed by the adabda, refined etiquette that dictates how one stands, how one speaks, and how one lowers their gaze in the presence of a superior. As she is led deeper into the complex, the girl notices the architecture. The harem is not a single room, but a city within a city, a labyrinth of over 400 rooms, dozens of baths, mosques, and hospitals. The walls are thick, built to keep the heat of the summer out and the warmth of the brazier in. She passes through the Golden Road, a long, narrow passage paved with stone where the Sultan would walk during celebrations. To her, it feels like a tunnel between worlds. The light here is different. It is indirect, softened by the thick masonry and the colored glass of the high domes. It creates an atmosphere of perpetual twilight, a soft, amber-hued existence where time feels fluid. She is taken first to the baths, the hammam. This is the ritual of purification, the literal washing away of her old life. The air in the hammam is thick with steam that smells of laurel soap and rosewater. The sound of water splashing against marble basins is musical, echoing off the domed ceiling where small star-shaped holes let in beams of sunlight that pierce the mist like solid pillars of gold. She is scrubbed, her hair is combed with fine wooden combs, and she is dressed in the simple, clean garments of an Essenian novice. The hierarchy begins to reveal itself to her, not through words, but through geography. She is placed in a large, communal ward with other young girls. The room is vast, with raised wooden platforms covered in thick carpets and cushions. This is the base of the pyramid. Here, she will spend her first years learning. The harem was, first and foremost, an educational institution. She will not spend her days in idleness. There are languages to be mastered: Ottoman, Turkish, Persian, and Arabic. There is the delicate art of calligraphy, the precision of needlework, the complex theories of music, and the playing of the oud or the konan. Most importantly, there is the study of the Quran and the intricate protocols of the court. She watches the older women, the kalfas or supervisors, who move with an air of quiet authority. They are the managers of this world. They carry keys at their belts that jingle softly, a metallic percussion to their steady pace. These women have lived here for decades. They know every secret of the plumbing, every crack in the tile work, and the temperament of every person in the house. They are the teachers, the disciplinarians, and the surrogate mothers. Our young novice watches how they tilt their heads when they speak, how they never turn their backs on a room, how they communicate volumes with a single movement of an eyebrow. The day in the harem follows the sun. It begins with the first call to prayer, a distant, melodic cry that floats over the palace walls from the nearby Hagia Sophia. The girls rise in the dim light, folding their bedding with a neatness that is mandatory. Breakfast is a quiet affair: bread, olives, honey, and perhaps some dried fruit, eaten while sitting cross-legged around low, circular trays. There is no clatter of cutlery. They eat with their hands, using pieces of bread as vessels, a silent choreography of fingers and crumbs. As the morning progresses, the novice is put to work. Her hands, once used to the rough chores of a village, now learn the softness of silk thread. She is taught to embroider pomegranates and vines onto the edges of a sash. The work is slow. It requires a stillness of the body and a focus of the mind. In this stillness, she begins to understand the pace of the palace. It is not the pace of the seasons or the harvest. It is the pace of the dynasty. Everything is built to last centuries, so there is no need to rush. She hears the sounds of the palace beyond the harem walls, the muffled hoofbeats of horses in the outer courtyards, the faint sound of the divanwai, the imperial council, meeting to discuss the fate of empires. But here, the concerns are more immediate and yet more abstract. The placement of a vase, the brewing of a perfect cup of coffee, the correct way to fold a pashmina shawl. These small things are the currency of her new life. To do a small task perfectly is to show respect for the order of the universe. In the afternoon, the heat of the Istanbul sun settles over the lead-covered domes of the palace. The harem retreats into the coolest corners. The novice finds herself in one of the smaller courtyards, where a fountain trickles into a marble basin. The sound of water is the heartbeat of the Topkapı. It provides a constant, soothing white noise that masks the whispers of the inhabitants. She sits on a low stone bench, her lesson book open on her lap. The Persian verses are beautiful but difficult. the script winding like smoke across the page. She looks up and sees a woman of higher rank passing by. This woman is an Iqbal, one who has caught the eye of the hierarchy. She wears a vest of brocade, stiff with silver thread, and her head is draped in a veil so thin it looks like a puff of mountain mist. Behind her walk two younger servants, their movements synchronized with hers. The novice feels a strange mixture of awe and trepidation. She realizes that the harem is a ladder, and every rung is made of both privilege and responsibility. The higher one climbs, the more beautiful the clothes, but the heavier the expectations. The valid sultan, the mother of the sultan, is the sun around which this entire system orbits. The novice has not seen her yet, but she feels her presence everywhere. It is in the way that Kalfas straighten their posture when they pass the valid's apartments. It is in the quality of the food that comes from the kitchens and the strictness of the evening curfews. The valid is the ultimate authority, the protector of the family's honor and the manager of its vast wealth. She is the proof that in this world of marble and silk, a woman's power is not just possible, but absolute as evening approaches. The shadows in the courtyard lengthen, stretching out like long, thin fingers. The call to prayer sounds again, a reminder of the spiritual framework that holds the palace together. The air grows cooler, smelling of the sea and the evening primrose. The novice is led back to the communal ward. The transition from day to night is marked by the lighting of oil lamps. The flames flicker in their glass housings, casting a warm, dancing amber light against the blue and turquoise tiles. The patterns on the walls seem to move, the painted vines swaying in the lamplight. Dinner is more substantial than breakfast. Pilaf with saffron, lamb stewed with apricots, and sherbet made from rose petals. They eat in groups, the shared meal fostering a sense of community that is essential for survival in such a closed environment. Despite the competition that the myths often emphasize, the reality of the harem was one of deep sisterhood. These women were each other's only family. They shared their secrets in the dark, whispered stories of their homelands, and supported one another through the long, quiet years of service. After dinner, there is a period of leisure. Some women play backgammon, the wooden dice clicking sharply against the board. Others play the oud, the low, mournful notes of the lute-like instrument drifting through the halls. The novice sits in a corner, watching the smoke from a small incense burner rise in a straight, silver line before breaking into curls against the ceiling. She feels the exhaustion of the day settling into her bones, not a physical exhaustion from labor, but a mental exhaustion from the sheer volume of new things she has had to absorb. She thinks of the Sultan, the man who lives at the center of this maze, yet feels like a ghost. He is the shadow of God on earth, a figure of immense power who is rarely seen but always felt. To her, he is not a man yet. He is a concept, a destination at the end of a very long and difficult road. She wonders if he, too, feels the weight of the silence in the palace. She wonders if he, too, listens to the wind coming off the Bosphorus and feels small against the backdrop of history. The Kalfas begin to make their rounds, signaling that it is time for rest. The lamps are dimmed one by one, the circles of light shrinking until only a few remain in the long corridors. The novice spreads her mattress on the raised platform. The wool is firm and smells faintly of lavender. She lies down, pulling a heavy silken quilt up to her chin. The room is filled with the soft breathing of dozens of other girls, a collective sigh of a world going to sleep. Outside her window, the moon has risen, a silver crescent hanging over the Seraglio point. The water of the Bosphorus is a dark, churning ribbon separating the palace from the rest of the world. The girl looks at the lattice work of her window, the dark wood silhouetted against the pale sky. She is no longer the girl from the mountains, but she is not yet a woman of the palace. She is in the space between, a quiet, expectant space. The palace settles. The stone, which has absorbed the heat of the day, begins to release it, warming the air just enough to be comfortable. Somewhere in the distance, a gate creaks on its iron hinges, and a night watchman's staff thumps once, twice against the pavement. It is a signal that all is well, that the borders are secure, and that the house of felicity is at peace. The novice closes her eyes. In the darkness, the sounds of the palace become more vivid. The drip of a fountain, the rustle of a curtain in a stray breeze, the distant, rhythmic creaking of the wooden ships in the harbour. These are the sounds that will compose the soundtrack of her life for years to come. She realizes that the harem is not just a place of waiting. It is a place of becoming. Every silent hour, every stitch of embroidery, every memorized verse is a brick in the foundation of the person she is meant to be. The weight of the day slips away, replaced by the heavy, velvet pull of sleep. She feels the vastness of the Topkapı around her, the miles of lead piping, the thousands of tiles, the hidden passages, and the grand halls, all of it stilled under the moonlight. She is a single heartbeat in the chest of an empire, a small but vital part of a grand unfolding story. As her breathing slows to match the rhythm of the city outside, she drifts into a dreamless state, tucked into the heart of the palace, protected by the walls, the silence, and the ancient, unyielding laws of the court. The first night is always the longest. Yet here, in the cradle of the harem, it feels as though time has simply paused to catch its breath. The shadows on the wall remain still. The air stays sweet with a lingering scent of incense, and the world remains perfectly, beautifully hushed. Tomorrow will bring more lessons, more protocols, and more stairs to climb, but for now, there is only the cool silk of the pillow and the steady, comforting pulse of the sleeping palace. The first dawn inside the harem does not arrive with the dramatic flare of a sun rising over the open steppe. Instead, it manifests as a gradual thinning of the blue-black shadows into a pale, translucent violet. Before the first sliver of gold touches the high, leaded domes of the Topkapı, the silence of the communal ward is broken by the soft, rhythmic wooden thud of a kalfa staff against the marble floor. It is not a harsh sound, but a persistent one, a signal that the day has begun. The young girl stirs beneath her heavy silk quilt, her senses recalibrating to the scent of cold stone and extinguishing oil lamps. There is no lingering in bed here. In the Imperial Harem, discipline is the invisible architecture that supports the weight of the dynasty. And that discipline begins with the breath of the morning. She watches as the other novices rise in a coordinated, near-silent motion. They move like shadows, folding their bedding with practiced precision. Each mattress is rolled, each quilt smoothed, and each pillow placed just so, before the entire bundle is stowed away in the deep wooden cupboards that line the walls. To leave a crease is to show a lapse in character. To be loud is to show a lack of breeding. The girl mimics them, her fingers fumbling slightly with the heavy fabric, her eyes darting to the girl beside her to ensure her corners are square. This is her first lesson. In this house, the smallest action is a reflection of one's inner order. They are led in a single file toward the hammam area for the morning ablution. The air here is already warming, the furnace below, the floors having been stoked long before the sun. The ritual of washing is thorough and rhythmic. The sound of water trickling from brass taps into marble basins provides a steady, meditative backdrop. She learns the specific sequence of the morning toilet, the way the hair is brushed 100 times until it shines like a raven's wing, the way the skin is softened with almond oil, the way the teeth are cleaned with a twig of mis. There is a communal intimacy to it, yet it is stripped of vanity. This is about preparation. The body is a vessel for the state, and it must be kept in a state of perpetual readiness and purity. Dressing is another exercise in patience and layers. First comes the gimlek, a thin gauze-like chemise made of raw silk or fine cotton that feels like a second skin. Over this, she pulls on the kalvar, the voluminous trousers that gather at the ankle, providing both modesty and ease of movement. Then comes the entari, the long robe that buttons at the waist and flows to the floor. As a novice, her garments are simple, unadorned by the heavy gold embroidery she saw on the older women the night before. But the fabric is of a quality she has never touched, heavy, purposeful, and dyed in a soft, muted green that signifies her junior status. A simple sash is tied around her waist, and her hair is braided tightly, coiled at the back of her head to stay out of the way of her work. By the time they emerge from the dressing quarters, the sun is finally hitting the high lattice of the windows, casting long ladders of light across the hallways. The morning meal is served in the same communal space, a quiet affair of olives, hard cheeses, honey, and warm bread. They sit on the floor around low, circular wooden trays called soft. There is a specific etiquette to the meal: how to break the bread without making a mess, how to take only what is directly in front of you, how to chew without sound. A kalfa, an experienced supervisor with a face as lined and wise as an old map, stands over them, her eyes missing nothing. She does not speak often, but when she does, her voice is a low, steady hum that carries the weight of decades of palace life. The morning transitions into the hours of formal education. It is here that the myth of the harem as a place of idle lounging is most thoroughly dismantled. The girl is led to a large sun-drenched room where the walls are covered in shelves of scrolls and bound books. This is the school of the harem, a place of intense intellectual and artistic training. For the next several hours, the novices are immersed in the complexities of the Ottoman Turkish language. It is a language of layers, Turkish core wrapped in the elegant silks of Persian poetry and the sturdy armor of Arabic grammar. The girl holds her reed pen, the kalem, with trembling fingers. She learns to dip it into the inkwell, to tap off the excess, and to draw the first long, elegant strokes of the olive. It is more than writing. It is a form of prayer, a way of aligning the hand with the divine order. Beside her, other girls are reciting verses from the Quran, their voices blending into a soft, hypnotic drone that fills the room like the buzzing of bees. Religion is the heartbeat of their daily routine, providing the moral and legal framework for everything they do. They learn the lives of the prophets, the intricacies of Islamic law, and the specific duties of a woman within the Sultan's household. This is not merely spiritual instruction. It is a lesson in power. To understand the law is to understand how the empire is governed. And these women are being trained to be the mothers and consorts of the men who will one day rule half the world. As the midday sun reaches its zenith, the lessons shift from the intellectual to the manual. The girl is handed a circular embroidery frame and a needle so fine it is almost invisible. This is the art of okul, the meticulous needlework that decorates the world of the Sultan. She is taught to follow a pattern of carnations and tulips. her needle dipping in and out of the taut silk with a rhythmic pop pop pop. The Euster, the master teacher, walks between the rows of girls. She pauses behind our novice, placing a cool, steady hand on her shoulder. Slower, the Euster whispers. The silk remembers the haste of the hand. Let the thread find its own way. This embroidery is a metaphor for their lives. Each stitch is tiny, seemingly insignificant, yet together they create a tapestry of immense value. The girl begins to understand that her time here is not measured in days or months, but in the perfection of these small acts. Silence is maintained throughout the afternoon work. The only sounds are the rustle of fabric, the occasional snip of silver shears, and the distant muffled calls of the palace guards changing watch in the courtyards beyond. The harem is a sanctuary of focus, a place where the outside world's chaos is filtered through layers of stone and tradition, until only the essence of work remains. Following the needlework comes the music. In a vaulted chamber with acoustics so perfect that a whisper carries across the room, the girls are introduced to the macabre complex system of melodies and scales that defines Ottoman classical music. The girl is given a small def, a tambourine, to practice the rhythmic cycles. The teacher plays the ney, a reed flute whose breathy, mournful tone seems to vibrate in the very marrow of the girl's bones. The music is not for performance in the way she once understood it. It is a discipline of the soul. To master a rhythm is to master one's own heartbeat. To find the correct note is to find one's place in the celestial harmony. As the afternoon shadows begin to stretch across the Eisnick tiles, the hierarchy of the harem becomes more visible. The novices are permitted a brief period of rest in the courtyard, where they can walk among the orange trees and the fountains. Here, the girl observes the gedikli, the women who have completed their initial training and have been selected for specific duties in the Sultan's service. They move with a different kind of greater confidence, born of knowing exactly where they stand. They carry themselves with an internal stillness, their eyes observant but never prying. Above them are the gizds, those who have been noticed, and higher still, the iqbals and the cadents, the mothers of the Sultan's children. The girl watches an iqbal walking in a private gallery above the courtyard. The woman moves slowly, her hand resting on the marble railing. She is draped in furs and jewels that catch the dying light, but her expression is one of profound, settled patience. She is not rushing anywhere. She has nowhere else to be. The harem is her world, and she has mastered its currents. The novice realizes that the path from the communal ward to that high gallery is not a sprint. It is a slow, methodical ascent that could take years or decades, or may never happen at all. This realization brings a strange sense of calm. The pressure of the new begins to fade, replaced by the weight of the permanent. She begins to see the harem as a great, slow-moving river. You do not fight the current. You learn to float within it, to find the eddies and the still points. The kalfas and eusters are the anchors, ensuring that the river stays within its banks. The girls are the water, moving slowly toward an unseen sea. The hierarchy is not a ladder to be climbed with ambition, but a structure to be inhabited with dignity. As the sun sets, casting a deep golden-orange glow over the city of Istanbul, the evening meal is served. It is a mirror of the morning, quiet and orderly. Afterward, there is a short time for communal prayer, and then the evening's leisure. Some of the older girls tell stories, not the grand legends of old, but quiet stories of the palace's history, of the great valid sultans of the past who started just like them as frightened novices in green robes. They speak of Cakesum and Harem, names that ring like silver bells in the quiet room. These are the patron saints of the harem, the women who understood that power in this house is built on a foundation of silence and observation. The weeks inside the harem do not pass with the frantic urgency of the world beyond the high gate. Instead, they unfurl like a bolt of heavy silk, one rhythmic oscillation at a time. For the young novice, now accustomed to the pre-dawn chill of the marble and the floral scent of the morning's rosewater, the internal geography of the palace has begun to reveal its verticality. She has learned that the harem is not a flat expanse of rooms, but a mountain of influence where every step upward requires a more refined silence and a more calculated grace. The air in the higher corridors feels thinner, more pressurized by the weight of unspoken expectations. She begins to notice that the older women, the Kalfas, who have served for 20 years, do not merely walk. They navigate. They move through the halls with a sensory awareness that borders on the preternatural, eyes catching the slight hesitation of a servant or the specific way a curtain has been drawn, interpreting these tiny deviations as one might read a change in the wind. Before a storm, at the summit of this mountain sits the valid sultan. Her presence is not announced by trumpets or shouting, but by a profound deepening of the surrounding quiet. The novice first senses her through the behavior of the mother of the harem and the chief black eunuch, who speak of the valid in hushed, tonal qualities of reverence that they afford to no one else, not even the sultan's favorites. The valid is the anchor of the dynasty, the woman who has survived the perilous climb from novice to consort to mother of the reigning sovereign. Her power is domestic, yes, but in the Ottoman world, the domestic is the political. From her apartments, decorated with the finest tiles and overlooking a private garden, she manages the harem's immense budget, oversees the education of the princes, and acts as the ultimate arbiter of disputes. The novice catches a distant glimpse of her one afternoon figure in a high-waisted robe of midnight blue, surrounded by a phalanx of senior youth. The valet does not look at the girls as she passes, but her aura is one of absolute, settled authority. She is the proof that for a woman of intelligence and iron discipline, the harem is not a dead end, but a theatre of immense, indirect governance. The girl begins to understand that the path upward is paved with more than just beauty. In the quiet hours of the afternoon, while the sun bakes the lead roofs and the sound of the Bosphorus is a distant, rhythmic shush, she observes the subtle competition between the women who have moved past their initial training. This competition is not loud or vulgar. There are no raised voices or overt gestures of rivalry. Instead, it is a game of proximity and competence. To be the one chosen to carry the sultan's coffee, or to be the one entrusted with the valid's private correspondence, requires a mastery of the self that few possess. One must be invisible yet indispensable. The novice watches an older girl, a talented musician, spend 6 hours a day practicing the timbre until her fingertips are calloused and her technique is flawless. This is not merely for the love of music, but because excellence is a currency. In this structured world, talent is the only way to catch the eye of the supervisors who decide who shall be promoted. She learns the names of the different ranks like a litany, who perform the daily labor, the laggards, the apprentices, and the gediklis, the elite rank of those who serve the sultan's person. Above them are the iqbals, the fortunate ones who have attained a level of favor that grants them their own rooms and servants. The novice realizes that the harem is a meritocracy of a very specific kind. A girl who can recite Persian poetry with perfect inflection, who can manage a household's accounts without error, and who can navigate the complex alliances of the senior women will find her status rising. It is a slow, grinding process of proving one's worthiness through every word and gesture. She sees two senior women sharing a cup of sherbet in a shaded corner of the courtyard. Their conversation is low, their heads inclined toward each other. They are weaving an alliance, perhaps discussing which of the younger girls shows the most promise, or how to subtly influence the choice of a new head of the kitchens. Power here is a liquid thing. It flows through corridors, under doors, and settles in the places where people gather in confidence. The novice's own education deepens as she is moved from simple embroidery to the more complex task of managing the linens of the higher-ranking apartments. This shift in duty allows her to see the inner workings of the more prestigious households. She sees the way the cadens, the mothers of the princes, interact with their children and their attendants. Motherhood is the ultimate shield and the ultimate weapon in the harem. A woman's status is inextricably linked to the survival and success of her sons. The novice observes the fierce, quiet protection these mothers extend over their children. The way they scrutinize every piece of fruit and every cup of water. Life here is a long-form strategy, a chess game played over decades. The women do not think in days. They think in reigns. They understand that the current sultan is the sun, but that his sons are the stars that will one day determine the new dawn. To be a part of a prince's household is to tether one's soul to a future that is as uncertain as it is potentially glorious. There is a sense of collective waiting that permeates the stones of the Topkapı. It is a patient, feline sort of waiting. The novice spends her evenings listening to the senior Kalfas tell stories of the Sultanate of Women, the era when the valid sultans effectively directed the empire's policy from behind the lattice of the harem. They speak of letters sent to foreign queens, of grand mosques commissioned and built, and of the subtle ways a whisper in the sultan's ear could change the course of a war. This is the hidden history of the empire, a narrative written in the margins of the official chronicles. The girl begins to see the wooden screens, the caves not as barriers meant to keep the women in, but as filters that allow them to see the world without being consumed by it. There is a safety in this visibility and scene, a tactical advantage to being the observer rather than the observed, as she moves through her daily chores, polishing the silver braziers, replenishing the scented oils in the lamps, and assisting with the elaborate dressing of the senior women. She learns the art of the unspoken in the harem. What is not said is often more important than what is. A slightly longer pause before answering a question, a particular choice of flower in a vase, or the omission of a name in a greeting can signal a shift in the delicate balance of power. She practices her own poker face, keeping her expression neutral and her eyes lowered as she has been taught. She is learning to be a ghost in the machine, a silent witness who stores information like a squirrel stores nuts for the winter. Knowledge is the only true protection one has here. To know who is in favor, who is in debt, and who is restless is to possess a map of a very dangerous but rewarding terrain. The routine remains her greatest teacher. The 5 daily prayers provide the punctuation for her thoughts. The rhythmic prostrations, a reminder of her smallness in the face of the divine and the dynastic. The food continues to be excellent, though she eats it with a new understanding of the labor that goes into every grain of rice. She sees the vast network of the palace kitchens, the thousands of employees who labor to keep the harem fed, and realizes that she is part of a massive, living organism. The harem is not an island. It is the beating heart of the imperial body. The women here are not prisoners in the sense she once imagined. They are the administrators of the Sultan's private life. And because his private life is the source of the dynasty's continuity, their work is sacred. One evening, as she sits in the communal ward, she watches a group of older girls who are about to be graduated from their training. Some will stay in the palace to become Kalfas, while others will be given in marriage to high-ranking officials of the state, taking with them the manners, the education, and the connections they have forged within these walls. These women will become the matriarchs of the empire's elite families, serving as the Sultan's eyes and ears in the grand houses of Istanbul. The harem, she realizes, is a forge. It takes raw, frightened girls from the furthest reaches of the world and tempers them into steel. Whether they stay or leave, they are forever marked by the discipline and the sophistication of the House of Felicity. The girl looks at her hands, no longer rough from the village, but pale and steady. She has learned to hold a pen, a needle, and a secret with equal force. The fear of her first night has been entirely replaced by a profound, cool-headed ambition. She does not want to merely be a servant. She wants to be a pillar. She wants to be the one whose whisper carries weight, the one whose silence is respected. She watches the flickering shadows of the oil lamps on the tiled walls and sees not ghosts, but possibilities. The harem is a world of rules, but for those who master the rules, it is also a world of immense, quiet influence. She understands now that her confinement is a form of concentration. By narrowing her world to these 400 rooms and these 1,000 women, the empire has forced her to sharpen her mind until it is as fine as a surgeon's blade. The transition from a novice of the ward to a student of the higher arts is marked not by a sudden ceremony, but by the gradual introduction of more refined sounds into the girl's daily life. The rhythmic click of her slippers on the marble now carries her toward the mekane, the music room, where the air is perpetually vibrated by the resonance of strings and the breathy wood of the flute. Here, the architecture itself seems designed to serve the ear. The high domed ceiling is punctuated by acoustic cavities that catch the low drone of the timbre and lift it, allowing the melody to hang in the air like a fine mist. She spends hours seated on a low cushion, her back straight as a cypress tree, learning the geometry of the oud. Her fingers, once accustomed to the utilitarian tasks of the kitchen or the laundry, now find the delicate tension of the gut strings. She is taught that a note is not merely a sound, but a destination, a point of balance between the silence that precedes it and the silence that follows. This training in music is a fundamental pillar of the harem's educational system. It is believed that a woman who can master the complexities of the maqam, the melodic modes of the East, possesses a soul that is similarly disciplined and harmonious. The girl learns that each maqam corresponds to a specific time of day and a specific emotional state. There is a mode for the pale, expectant light of dawn, and another for the heavy, contemplative heat of the afternoon. As she practices, she hears the sounds of other lessons drifting through the corridors like layers of a dream. From a neighboring room comes the rhythmic chanting of girls memorizing the divan of a great Persian poet. From another, the scratching of reed pens against heavy, polished paper. Calligraphy becomes her second sanctuary. In the quiet of the library, under the watchful eye of a senior Euster, she learns the alchemy of ink and paper. The paper is not the rough, fibrous sheets she had known in her childhood, but a Harley paper that has been treated with egg white and starch, then polished with a crystal egg until it is as smooth as ivory. To write upon it is to glide. The ink is made of soot collected from the mosque lamps, mixed with gum, Arabic and water, creating a blackness so deep it seems to pull the light into the page. She learns to hold the kalam, the reed pennet, a precise angle, her breath held still as she executes the long, sweeping curve of a vowel. The teacher explains that the script is a reflection of the writer's internal state. If the mind is cluttered, the line will be jagged. If the heart is restless, the ink will bleed. Accuracy is a form of meditation, and the girl finds that the more she focuses on the tip of her pen, the more the walls of her confinement seem to expand rather than contract. The scents of the harem become the markers of her progress. In the lower wards, the air smelled of wood smoke and simple soap. In these halls of higher learning, the atmosphere is sophisticated and layered. There is the pervasive, cooling scent of rosewater, used to wash the floors and refresh the face. There is the sharp, medicinal temps of the saffron used in the infirmary, and the heavy, sweet resin of agar wood, burned in the apartments of the favorites. When she walks past the closed doors of the valid sultan's suite, she catches the fleeting aroma of ambergris and musk scents that are reserved for the highest echelons of the household. These odors are not merely pleasantries. They are a sensory map of the hierarchy. One knows where they are and who is nearby, simply by breathing. As her education progresses, the girl is introduced to the complexities of court etiquette, the adab. This is perhaps the most difficult subject of all, for it requires a constant, vigilant awareness of one's body in space. She learns how to approach a superior, the number of steps to take, the depth of the bow, the specific way to cross her hands over her chest as a sign of humility. She learns the language of the eyes, how to keep them lowered without appearing sullen, and how to convey respect through a brief, steady glance. She is taught the ritual of the coffee service, a choreography of movements so precise that it resembles a slow-motion dance. The tray must be held at a certain height. The cup must be offered with a specific turn of the wrist. The retreat must be made without ever turning one's back. It is within these lessons that the reality of her potential future is gently introduced. The senior Kalfas begin to speak of the presentation. This is handled with a clinical, historical gravity, far removed from the sensationalism of outside myths. It is explained to the girls that some among them, those who show the highest degree of refinement, intelligence, and grace, may one day be selected to enter the service of the Sultan himself. This is presented not as a romantic fantasy, but as a monumental responsibility, the highest possible rank a woman can achieve in the service of the House of Osman. Preparation for this potentiality involves a rigorous focus on physical health and aesthetic perfection. They are taught the secrets of the hammam, how to use volcanic clays to soften the skin, how to tint the nails with henna in patterns that mimic the veins of marble, and how to move in heavy, embroidered silks without losing the fluidity of their gait. The focus is entirely on the cultivation of an idealized presence. A woman of the Sultan's household must be a living work of art, a personification of the empire's culture and wealth. The girl observes the older students being groomed for this possibility. She'll see them practicing their conversation, learning to discuss history, theology, and poetry with a wit that is sharp but never abrasive. They are being prepared to be the intellectual companions of the most powerful man on earth. The girl feels a flicker of apprehension, but it is tempered by the discipline she has already acquired. She begins to see that her body and her mind are being polished like the Eisnick tiles on the walls, prepared to reflect the light of the sovereign should it ever fall upon her. During the brief periods of recreation in the inner gardens, The girl begins to form quiet, resilient friendships. These are not the loud, boisterous bonds of her youth, but alliances built on shared silence and small, secret kindnesses. She grows close to a girl named Layla, who comes from a land of high mountains far to the east. They sit together by the fountain, the spray of the water cooling their faces, and speak in low tones about the things they have learned. They do not talk of the past. The palace has a way of making the before feel like a story told by someone else. Instead, they talk of the weight of the silk they are sewing, or the difficulty of a particular musical scale. One afternoon, Layla reaches out and adjusts the fold of the girl's headscarf, a gesture of sisterly care that brings a sudden, brief lump to her throat. In a world of rigid hierarchy, these small moments of human connection are the invisible threads that prevent them from fraying. The girl notices how the older women navigate their days with a quality she can only describe as containment. She watches a Kalfa receive a piece of news, perhaps a change in the kitchen's budget or a minor reprimand from the mother of the harem. The woman's face remains as still as the surface of a pond. Not a muscle twitches. Her eyes do not widen. She simply absorbs the information, processes it, and continues her walk. This emotional restraint is the true mark of a woman of the palace. To show anger is to lose power. To show fear is to invite it. To show joy too openly is to reveal a vulnerability. The girl begins to practice this herself. When she pricks her finger with the embroidery needle, she no longer gasps. She simply watches the small bead of red against the white silk and waits for the sensation to pass before continuing her work. One evening, while returning from the library, she takes a longer route through a corridor she has rarely visited. The sun is setting and the light is a deep, burnished copper. She passes a window that looks out over the Sea of Marmara, where the white sails of the trade ships look like tiny petals scattered on a dark blue cloth. She realizes that she no longer feels the urge to run toward that horizon. The palace, which once felt like a labyrinth of stone and shadow, now feels like a complex, protective shell. She understands the rhythm of the gates, the timing of the guards, and the silent language of the halls. She is no longer a stranger in this house. She is a part of its architecture. The realization settles over her that survival in the harem, and, more than survival, the possibility of thriving, depends entirely on patience. It is the patience of the stonecutter, the patience of the weaver, the patience of the calligrapher. She sees that those who are restless, who chafe against the rules or seek to hurry their progress, are the ones who eventually fade away or find themselves relegated to the most menial of tasks. The women who rise are those who can sit in a room for 10 hours, embroidering a single sleeve, and find a kind of liberty in that focus. They are the ones who can wait years for a single word of recognition, and in that waiting grow stronger, wiser, and more observant as she prepares for bed. Laying out her simple nightgown and folding her daytime robes with the required precision, she feels a profound sense of gratitude. The marble floor beneath her feet is cold, but it is solid. The rules that govern her life are strict, but they are predictable. She thinks of the Valid Sultan sitting in her high apartments, and wonders if the great woman also had to learn this same lesson of restraint. She suspects the answer is yes. In the harem, power is not seized. It is cultivated through 1,000 days of discipline. The turning of the seasons inside the Topkapı Palace is marked not by the changing of the landscape, for the stone and the tile remain immutable, but by the subtle shift in the temperature of the marble and the weight of the fabrics that rustle through the corridors. As autumn fades, the golden light of Istanbul becomes thin and sharp, and the winds blowing off the Black Sea bring a biting chill that even the thickest masonry cannot entirely repel. The young girl, now more accustomed to the internal rhythms of the house, watches as the heavy velvet curtains are hung over the doorways to trap the warmth of the charcoal braziers. The light within the harem becomes more concentrated, shrinking away from the windows and huddling around the glowing embers of the mangle. These bronze braziers, often intricately carved with geometric patterns, become the new centers of social gravity. Groups of women gather around them, their hands extended toward the warmth, their faces illuminated by a flickering, amber glow that softens the hard edges of their discipline. Winter in the harem is a time of profound, muffled stillness. When the snow finally falls, it descends in great silent flakes that blanket the leaden domes and the cypress trees of the inner courtyards. From behind the wooden caves, the girl watches the world turn white. The Bosphorus, usually a vibrant turquoise or a deep churning navy, becomes a slate-grey expanse, its surface misted by the cold. The palace feels even more like a world apart during these months, a limestone island floating in a sea of frost. The sound of the city beyond the walls is further dampened by the snow, leaving only the internal sounds: the crackle of a fire, the bubbling of a samovar, and the occasional, lonely cry of a gull. It is a time for the deeper study, for the memorization of long epic poems and the perfection of the most complex embroidery patterns that require the focus of many indoor hours. The arrival of Ramadan during these colder months brings a different kind of energy, a sacred, nocturnal vitality. The day is defined by a shared spiritual restraint, a communal fast that heightens the senses. The silence of the afternoon becomes even more pronounced as the women conserve their energy, the air thick with the absence of food and the presence of prayer. But as the sun dips below the horizon and the cannons fire from the sea walls to signal the iftar, the harem awakens with a gentle, joyful industry. The evenings are long and luminous. Trays of dates, olives, and warm leavened bread are circulated, followed by rich stews and honeyed pastries that smell of cinnamon and cloves. The oil lamps are lit in every corner, and the communal wards are filled with the soft murmur of conversation and the recitation of the Quran. These nights are the only time the strict hierarchy feels slightly softened by the shared experience of faith and the relief of the meal. Yet, even in this warmth, the girl notices the watchful eyes of the Kalfas, ensuring that the celebration remains within the bounds of courtly decorum. As she moves into more senior circles of service, the girl begins to understand the profound underlying gravity of motherhood within the harem. It is the invisible sun around which all political ambition orbits. To the outside world, the harem might seem a place of feminine seclusion, but to those within, it is a nursery of sovereignty. The birth of a prince is an event of seismic proportions, vibrating through every tile and timber of the palace. A woman who bears a son is no longer merely a member of the household. She becomes a Caden, a potential matriarch whose destiny is tethered to the life of her child. If her son should one day ascend the throne, she will become the valid sultan, the most powerful woman in the Islamic world. This historical reality creates a landscape where maternal love is inextricably linked to political survival. The girl observes the mothers of the Princess Thehosakis with a new, analytical clarity. Their lives are a paradox of immense privilege and constant, quiet anxiety. They live in more spacious apartments, surrounded by their own retinues of servants and teachers, yet they are never truly at rest. The girl sees it in the way a mother's hand lingers just a second too long on her son's forehead to check for fever, or the way her eyes scan the room whenever a new official or a high-ranking eunuch enters the presence. In the Ottoman system of the 16th and 17th centuries, the principle of fratricide loomed like a long shadow over the nursery. Because only one son could rule, and because the stability of the empire was thought to depend on a single, unchallenged line of succession, the stakes of motherhood were absolute. To be the mother of a prince was to be the guardian of a flame that everyone else was watching, some with loyalty and some with a calculating eye on the future. This anxiety is the low frequency, hum beneath the daily routine. It is never spoken of directly. To do so would be a breach of the adab, and perhaps even a dangerous provocation, but it manifests in 1,000 small ways. It is in the meticulous testing of the prince's food, the constant supervision of their play, and the strategic alliances their mothers form with the valid sultan and the chief black eunuch. The girl begins to see that the harem is not just a school or a residence. It is a fortress designed to protect the dynastic seed. The women who have borne sons move through the halls with a different kind of weight. Their grace is more guarded, their smiles more economical. They are participants in a high-stakes game, where the prize is the survival of their bloodline and the penalty for failure is total eclipse. Despite her junior status, the girl is occasionally called upon to assist in the apartments of these high-ranking women, bringing fresh linens or assisting with the preparation of the evening's incense. In these rooms, the atmosphere is heavy with the scent of sandalwood and the unspoken pressure of the future. She watches the way the mothers interact with one another, polite, formal, yet with an underlying tension that is like the stillness of two predators sharing the same watering hole. They discuss the education of their sons, the quality of the tutors, and the latest news from the provinces, each word a carefully placed stone in a larger mosaic of influence. The girl realizes that power here is not about the exercise of will, but about the endurance of the spirit. One must be able to outweight their rivals, to remain calm while the world shifts, and to maintain an unwavering focus on the ultimate goal. The education of the princes themselves is a matter of state concern, and the harem provides the first stage of this training. The girl sometimes hears the young princes reciting their lessons in the cage or the private schoolrooms. High-pitched voices repeating the same Arabic grammars and Persian couplets she herself has studied. It is a reminder that everyone in this palace, regardless of their gender or rank, is subject to the same rigorous discipline. Even the future sultan must learn to sit still, to master his breath, and to respect the authority of his teachers. There is a strange, shared kinship in this, a realization that the palace is a vast machine designed to produce excellence through the application of relentless routine. As the winter begins to thaw, and the first snowdrops push through the damp earth of the gardens, a different kind of news begins to permeate the harem's walls. It arrives not in the form of a newspaper or an official decree, but through the whisper network of the palace, the eunuchs, who move between the harem and the salamlik, the men's quarters, the merchants who bring silks and spices to the gates, and the kalfas who have ears in every corner. There is talk of a new campaign. The Sultan is planning to lead the army toward the western frontiers, toward the Danube and the heart of Europe. The news brings a subtle shift in the palace's energy. The pace of work in the sewing rooms increases as thousands of uniforms and tents must be prepared. The conversations in the courtyards turn toward the cost of grain and the movement of the janissaries. This news reminds the girl that the harem is not a closed circle, but a vital organ within a much larger body. The silks she sews, the prayers she recites, and the quiet she maintains are all connected to the movements of armies thousands of miles away. The empire is a vast, interconnected web, and the Topkapı is the center where all the threads meet. A shift in the political landscape of the borderlands will eventually be felt in the budget of the kitchens, or the status of a particular official. She begins to see her own life as a small but necessary part of this grand, unfolding drama. She is not just a girl in a room. She is a witness to the heartbeat of an empire. One evening, standing by the window as the sun sets behind the hills of Pera, she feels a strange sense of peace. The anxiety of the mothers, the discipline of the lessons, the cold of the winter, and the news of the coming war all blend into a single, coherent whole. The harem is a place of profound complexity, a world where the most delicate beauty lives side by side with the most ruthless necessity. She has learned to inhabit this complexity without being crushed by it. She has learned that survival is not about avoiding the storm, but about becoming as steady and as silent as the stone walls that surround her. The departure of the Sultan for the northern campaigns leaves the Topkapı Palace in a state of suspended animation. A breath held so long it becomes the very atmosphere of the hallways. With the sovereign's physical presence removed to the mud and thunder of the Balkan frontiers, the harem shifts its focus inward, becoming a hall of mirrors where every reflection is scrutinized for a hint of the future. The young girl, now moving with the practiced fluidity of a seasoned student, notices that the air has grown thick with the weight of rumors. In this world, a rumor is not a shouted thing. It is a soft, persistent friction, like the sound of silk dragging across a stone floor. It travels through the low-voiced conversations of the eunuchs guarding the carriage gate, through the hurried whispers of the laundry maids, and eventually settles in the communal sewing rooms where the women of the household spend their long, quiet afternoons. Alliances within these walls are forged in the crucible of shared labor. Sitting in a circle in one of the smaller, sun-drenched courtyards, the girl watches how the older women navigate their social terrain while their needles fly through panels of heavy brocade. A shared task, such as the embroidery of a ceremonial kaftan, or the collective practice of a complex musical makam, provides the perfect cover for the exchange of political currency. To an outsider, they are merely women sewing. To the initiated, they are a network of intelligence. One woman might mention, with an air of complete indifference, that the valid sultan spent an unusually long time in private audience with the chief black eunuch. Another might respond by noting the particular quality of the incense being burned in the apartments of the third. Cadden, through these fragments of observation, a map of the current power structure is drawn and redrawn daily. The girl finds herself drawn into the orbit of a senior Kalfa named Faith, a woman whose composure is so absolute she seems carved from the same Parian marble as the fountains. Afif takes an interest in the girl's calligraphy, and as they sit together over the ink, the elder woman begins to teach her the most important lesson of the harem, the art of the guarded alliance. To survive here, one must be part of a collective, yet remain an island of one's own secrets. A thread is strong only when it is woven with others. Afif whispers one afternoon, her eyes never leaving the page, but a thread that is too tight will snap when the loom shifts. The girl understands. The alliances are not based on friendship in the way she once understood the word. They are based on mutual stability. You support the woman next to you because her fall might create a vacuum that draws you in as well. beneath this veneer of sisterhood, a subtle, quiet rivalry begins to manifest. It centers on two of the younger Iqbals, women who have recently attained favor and are now navigating the treacherous waters of rising influence. The conflict is never overt. There are no arguments, no cold glares. Instead, it is a war of composure and symbolic gestures. One might arrive at a communal dinner wearing a shade of violet that is slightly more vibrant than is strictly necessary for her rank. The other might respond by demonstrating a superior mastery of a difficult Persian poem during an evening recitation. The girl observes them during a music lesson. One of the women, Nialufa, is playing the ney, her notes steady and breathy. The other, Gulbahar, listens with a face of such exaggerated, serene appreciation that it borders on a critique. It is a battle of who can be more perfectly palace-like, who can embody the adab with more effortless grace. The tension is palpable, a vibrating string in a silent room. Yet, if an official were to walk in, he would see nothing but two beautiful women engaged in a scholarly pursuit. This atmosphere of restrained competition is deepened by the ever-present shadow of succession uncertainty. The Ottoman system, in its transition away from the older tradition of provincial governorships for princes toward the more secluded life of the caliphs, the gilded cage, has created a unique psychological pressure within the harem, because the rules of succession are not always a simple matter of the eldest son, and because the health and favor of the sultan are the only true anchors of security. The women live in a state of perpetual what if. If the news from the campaign is bad, if the sultan falls ill, or if a particular prince gains the favor of the janissary, the entire internal hierarchy of the harem could be overturned in a single morning. A woman who is a favorite today could find herself in the old palace in Edirne tomorrow. Her influence vanished like smoke. The girl begins to see how this uncertainty affects the very way the women breathe. It is why the mothers of the princes are so vigilant, why the Kalfas are so meticulous in their record-keeping, and why the valid sultan's word is treated with the gravity of divine law. Stability is the most precious commodity in the Topkapı, and it is a commodity that is always in short supply. The women counter this by creating an environment of rigid, unchanging routine. If the world outside is shifting, if the sultan is at war and the future of the throne is a question mark, then the internal world must be even more disciplined. The floors must be polished more brightly, the prayers must be longer, the etiquette must be more flawless. It is a way of exerting control over a destiny that is ultimately out of their hands. As the weeks pass, the news from the campaign becomes sporadic and contradictory. One day, a messenger brings word of a great victory at a river crossing. The next, there are whispers of a siege that has stalled in the mud. The harem reacts to these flickers of information like a field of grass reacting to a distant wind. There is a tightening of the collective spirit. The girl notices that the valid sultan has not been seen in the public galleries for several days, and the chief black eunuch's face has become a mask of impenetrable stone. The music lessons continue, the embroidery frames are still full, and the calligraphy pens still scratch against the polished paper, but the quality of the silence has changed. It is no longer a peaceful silence. It is a defensive one. The protagonist finds herself sitting by a lattice window late one evening, looking out toward the Golden Horn. The water is dark, reflecting the few scattered lights of the city. Behind her, the ward is quiet, the other girls already asleep or lost in their own thoughts. She feels the immense weight of the palace around her, centuries of tradition, the thousands of lives that have been lived within these walls. all of them subject to the same atmospheric pressure of uncertainty. She realizes that her education has not just been about music or language. It has been an apprenticeship in the endurance of tension. To live here is to live on the edge of a great unknown, while maintaining the appearance of absolute, immovable calm. She thinks of Nilufer and Gulbahar, and the quiet war they are waging. She thinks of the princes in their secluded apartments, their futures hanging on a thread of chance and political maneuvering. She thinks of the Sultan, far away in a tent on a cold plain, whose heartbeat is the drum to which they all must dance. The harem is not a place of escape. It is a place of heightened reality, where the stakes of every action are magnified by the enclosure. Survival depends on the ability to remain emotionally neutral, to observe the shifting shadows without being moved by them, and to wait for the storm to pass without ever acknowledging that it is raining. A soft sound at the end of the corridor draws her attention, the rhythmic, hollow thump of a staff. It is the night watchman making his rounds. The sound is a reminder that the structure holds. The gates are locked, the guards are at their posts, and the rules of the house are being observed. Yet, as the sound fades into the distance, the girl is left with a lingering sense of unease. The silence of the palace is too deep tonight, the shadows too long. It is the kind of quiet that precedes a major shift in the world. She wraps her woolen shawl more tightly around her shoulders, feeling the chill of the stones seep through her slippers. The future of the empire, and her own place within it, feels like a page of calligraphy that has been written in invisible ink, waiting for the heat of an event to make the letters appear. Until then, there is only the waiting. She returns to her mattress and lies down, but sleep is slow to come. Every creak of the building, every rustle of a curtain, seems laden with significance. The harem is a world of whispers, and tonight, the whispers are telling a story of change. She closes her eyes, focusing on the rhythm of her own breathing, trying to find that center of gravity she has been taught to cultivate. Tomorrow, she will rise before dawn, she will wash, she will pray, and she will return to her lessons. She will continue to build her life, one stitch at a time, even as the foundations of the world feel as fluid as the dark water of the Bosphorus outside her window. The atmosphere in the ward is tense but quiet, a collective state of anticipation that needs no words. They are all daughters of the house, and they all know that the true test of their training is not how they act in the light of favor, but how they remain standing in the shadow of uncertainty. As the moon disappears behind a bank of thick winter clouds, the girl finally drifts into a light, watchful sleep, the echoes of the palace's long history murmuring in the corners of the room. The tension that had settled into the mortar of the palace walls begins to dissipate, not with a sudden burst of clarity, but with the steady, measured arrival of the imperial couriers, their presence signaled by the rhythmic drumming of hooves in the outer courts that filters through the harem's stone skin like a distant heartbeat. The Sultan's campaign has reached a point of stabilization, and with this news comes the reassertion of the palace's administrative gravity. At the center of this restoration is the Kisla Uga, the chief black eunuch, whose role is the essential bridge between the world of the Sultan's private household and the public machinery of the state. To the younger girls, he is a figure of immense, silent power. But to the protagonist, now having spent years within the labyrinth, is understood as a master of logistics and a pillar of structural continuity. He is the gatekeeper of felicity, and his office, situated near the main entrance to the harem, is the point through which all communication flows. His authority is not merely a matter of guarding doors. It is a complex administrative oversight that encompasses the management of the harem's vast endowments, the supervision of its personnel, and the delicate task of acting as a confidential messenger between the valid sultan and the Grand Vizier. The girl observes him from a distance as she performs her duties in the upper corridors. He moves with a slow, deliberate dignity, clad in robes of heavy silk that rustle with a particular, authoritative weight. In his hands, he often carries scrolls tied with silk cords, petitions from the outside, reports on the harvest of the crown lands in Egypt, or the details of a foreign envoy's arrival. He is the personification of the harem's connection to the empire, a living conduit who ensures that the needs of the household are met, while the requirements of the state are protected. The communication between the harem and the outside court is a study in meticulously managed indirectness. It is a world of screens, both literal and figurative. When the valid sultan needs to communicate with the imperial council, she does not do so in person. Instead, her messages are transcribed by the Kalfas, reviewed by the chief black eunuch, and delivered to the divan. These layers of mediation are not seen as a hindrance, but as a form of protection and a preservation of dignity. The protagonist, now entrusted with more sensitive tasks, begins to understand the sophistication of this system. She sees how the whisper of the harem concern about a particular official's loyalty or a suggestion for a charitable foundation travels through these channels, gaining weight as it moves until it reaches the ears of those who can act upon it. The harem is not a place of silence in the sense of an absence of voice. It is a place where the voice is concentrated, refined, and directed with surgical precision. This structural oversight extends to the very economy of the palace. The girl assists in the inventorying of the supplies that arrive through the carriage gates: great jars of oil from the Aegean, sacks of rice from the Nile Delta, and crates of fine porcelain from the East. Each item is recorded, taxed, and distributed according to a hierarchy that has been established for generations. The chief black eunuch's staff manages these resources with a frugality that belies the palace's outward luxury. Every candle, every ounce of incense, and every bolt of fabric is accounted for. It is a reminder that the harem is a massive, functioning institution that requires constant, vigilant management to remain solvent and stable. The girl realizes that the beauty of the tiled walls and the softness of the carpets are supported by a foundation of rigorous bookkeeping and administrative discipline. As the months turn into years, the protagonist notices a profound shift in her own perspective. She is no longer the girl who stands wide-eyed before the Eisnick tulips. She is now the one who holds the lamp for others. She has moved from the communal wards to the smaller, more private quarters of the senior attendants, and her responsibilities have shifted from learning to teaching. One afternoon, while crossing the courtyard of the eunuchs on an errand for the Euster of the sewing room, she pauses to observe a new group of arrivals. They are standing near the fountain, their small bundles clutched to their chests, their eyes darting nervously between the towering walls and the impassive faces of the guards. In their faces, she sees the ghost of her former self. She recognizes the specific shade of fear, the way they shrink away from the hollow echo of their own footsteps, the way they look at the latticed windows, as if trying to memorize the shape of the sky. But she also sees them with a new, professional detachment. She knows the sequence of events that awaits them: the bath, the change of clothes, the first, stumbling attempts at the adab, the long hours of the calligraphy pen. She feels a flicker of empathy, but it is tempered by the knowledge that this process is necessary. The palace must break the old self to build the new one. She watches as Senior Kalfa approach the girls, her voice low and steady. repeating the same instructions the protagonist heard years ago. The cycle continues. As inevitable as the tides of the Marmara, she realizes that she has become part of the very structure she once feared. Her movements are now synchronized with the rhythm of the house. She no longer has to think about the depth of her bow or the correct way to address a superior. These things have become as natural as breathing. She has learned the geography of influence, which corridors to avoid during certain hours, which kalfas appreciate a well-turned phrase, and how to read the mood of the household by the scent of the incense burning in the main halls. Her once vivid memories of the mountains and the village have not disappeared, but they have faded into the background, like the underpainting of a masterpiece that provides depth but is no longer the primary subject. This transformation is most apparent during the long, quiet evenings of study. She no longer struggles with the Persian verses. Instead, she finds a deep, meditative pleasure in the complexity of the grammar and the elegance of the metaphors. She has begun to appreciate the harem not as a place of confinement, but as a place of immense internal expansion. Within these walls, she has been given an education that most men in the empire could only dream of. She has learned history, philosophy, and the subtle arts of governance. She has learned to control her emotions until they are like a still pool of water, reflecting everything but moved by nothing. The walls that once felt like a prison now feel like a laboratory for the soul. She reflects on the nature of time within the Topkapı. Outside, time is a linear progression of events, battles won or lost, markets rising and falling, seasons changing. But inside the harem, time feels circular. It is the cycle of the prayers, the cycle of the meals, the cycle of the promotions and the retirements. Yet, beneath this circularity, there is a slow, irreversible ripening. A person enters the harem as raw silk and is woven through the years into a complex tapestry. She looks at her hands, which are now steady and capable, the skin pale from years of living in the tempered light of the domes. She is a different creature than the one who arrived at the sea gate. The realization brings a sense of quiet, settled peace. She understands that her life is not a series of missed opportunities, but a deliberate, focused journey toward a specific kind of excellence. She has traded the chaotic freedom of the world for the structured power of the palace. As she watches the younger girls being led toward their first bath, she feels a sense of stewardship. She is one of the guardians of this tradition, one of the links in the chain that stretches back to the beginnings of the dynasty and forward into an unimaginable future. The evening sun begins to dip behind the dome of the Hagia Sophia, casting a long, violet shadow across the courtyard. The protagonist turns back toward her quarters, her footsteps light and purposeful. She has a lesson to prepare for the morning, a set of accounts to review, and a quiet, internal world to maintain. The harem is settling into its nightly routine, the lamps being lit, the curtains being drawn, and the great silence once again asserting its dominion. She realizes that even within these enclosed walls, she has traveled a vast distance. Time has not just passed, it has worked upon her, carving away the unnecessary and polishing the essential as she enters her room and begins the familiar ritual of preparing for sleep. She feels the profound weight of the palace's history resting upon her shoulders. It is a comfortable weight, like a heavy fur-lined robe. She is no longer waiting for the world to happen to her. She is the one through whom the world of the palace happens. The uncertainty of the campaign, the rivalry of the Ikbels, and the dictates of the chief black eunuch are all parts of the grand, slow-moving river of her life. She closes her eyes, the scent of rosewater and old paper filling her senses, and drifts into a sleep that is deep, disciplined, and entirely her own. The harem remains a fortress of stone and silk, holding its secrets in the dark, and she remains within it a small, vital part of a story that will outlast the stars. The transition from the administrative stillness of the winter months into the vibrant, heightened anticipation of the spring is heralded by the arrival of the Bayram preparations, a period where the harem's internal clock accelerates, yet never loses its rhythmic, disciplined beat. The news has circulated through the Khalfas that a grand imperial wedding is to be celebrated. One of the Sultan's sisters is to be wed to a high-ranking Poshand the harem, as the domestic heart of the dynasty must transform into a workshop of unparalleled splendor. For our protagonist, who now occupies a position of significant oversight in the textile treasuries, this is a time of immense responsibility. She no longer merely sews. She directs the flow of luxury. The ceremony begins months before a single guest arrives, manifesting first as a deluge of fabric. The storerooms are opened, and the air becomes thick with the scent of cedar chests and dried lavender as bolts of Kotma velvet, Kemhar brocade, and gossamer earthen BRMCK silk are unrolled across long marble tables. The protagonist oversees the selection of the dowry fabrics. She runs her hands over a piece of crimson velvet from Bursa, the pile so thick it swallows the light, embossed with silver threads that form the shape of stylized carnations. These textiles are more than clothing. They are the vocabulary of Ottoman power. Each thread of gold or silver is a statement of the treasury's depth, each motif a prayer for the longevity of the House of Osman. The rehearsal of protocol becomes the daily liturgy. In the grandest halls of the harem, under the watchful gaze of the valid sultan, the ceremony is practiced with a clinical, almost mathematical precision. The younger girls are taught the specific cadence of the wedding procession, how to walk in staggered rows so that the bride's train, a river of silver-heavy silk, is never taut or tangled. They practice the distribution of seka, ceremonial coins and candies showered upon the participants, learning the exact arc the hand must make so the gifts fall like a benevolent rain rather than a disorganized clutter. The protagonist watches these rehearsals from the shadows of the gallery, her mind calculating the timing, the spacing, and the silence. In an imperial ceremony, a misplaced footstep is not merely a mistake. It is a fracture in the image of the Sultan's perfect order. Jewelry is brought forth from the guarded vaults, carried in velvet-lined trays by the eunuchs. The protagonist assists the senior Eustace in cataloguing these pieces. There are aigrettes, topped with plumes of heron feathers, held in place by emeralds the size of pigeon eggs. There are necklaces of pearls from the Persian Gulf, each one matched so perfectly in luster and size that they seem to have been grown from a single drop of moonlight. She handles a zalafelka, a temple ornament crusted with rubies that burn with a deep internal fire. As she cleans these stones with soft chamois cloth, she is struck by the contrast, the cold, hard permanence of the diamonds against the soft, fleeting warmth of the skin they will adorn. The contrast between this outward, imperial splendor and the inward quiet routine is never more visible than during the final days of preparation, while the outer courtyards of the Topkapı are being transformed with silk tents and the smell of roasting meats for the public feasts. The inner harem remains a sanctuary of whispered instructions and muffled footsteps. The protagonist might spend her morning coordinating the movement of 100 heavy trunks of dowry, but by afternoon, She is back in her small, familiar quarter, drinking a simple cup of sage tea and listening to the rhythmic drip of a fountain. The grandeur is a garment the harem puts on for the world, but the silence is its skin. She observes the bride-to-be, the sultan's sister, during the private henna night preparations. Despite the staggering wealth surrounding the princess, the walls draped in cloth volve, the floors covered in the finest silk carpets, from Herrick there is a profound stillness in the woman's demeanor. She sits like a statue as her hands are decorated with the reddish-brown paste of the henna, her eyes fixed on a distant point beyond the lattice. In this moment, the protagonist realizes that the princess is as much a subject of the protocol as the lowliest novice. Her marriage is a diplomatic maneuver, a binding of the pasha's loyalty to the throne. The jewels she wears are a uniform. The ceremony she endures is a duty. The splendor is a weight that must be carried with a grace that betrays no effort. The day of the procession arrives with the clarity of a spring morning in Istanbul. The protagonist is positioned in a high corridor that overlooks the Golden Road. From this vantage point, she sees the intersection of the two worlds. Below, the bride begins her journey toward the gates, a moving monument of silk and gold, surrounded by the high-ranking women of the court whose robes create a shifting kaleidoscope of emerald, ruby, and violet. The air is heavy with the scent of burning Alice wood, and the sound of the meta band echoing from the outer courtyards. It is a moment of total, blinding visibility. The dynasty is showing itself to itself, a display of continuity and unshakable strength. Yet, as the procession moves out of the harem and toward the pasha's palace, the protagonist feels the familiar, heavy quiet returning to the halls behind it. The hundreds of women who had spent months preparing for this single hour now melt back into their routines. The trays are cleared, the extra lamps are extinguished, and the remaining fabrics are folded and returned to the cedar chests. The spectacle has passed, leaving only the scent of rosewater in its wake. She walks through the now empty hall where the rehearsal had taken place. The marble is cold and silent once more. She leans against a window pillar, watching the dust motes dance in a stray beam of light that has found its way through the wooden screen. She reflects on the nature of their existence. To the world outside, they are invisible, mystery hidden behind thick walls and iron-bound gates. Yet, within these walls, they are the most visible of all. Their every move scrutinized, their every talent cultivated, their every silence measured. They are the unseen architects of the scene the world just witnessed. The pasha will receive a bride who is a master of the courtly arts, whose manners are flawless, and whose mind is a repository of imperial, traditional because of the invisible labor of the women in this house, the visibility of the ceremony and the invisibility of the life that created it are two sides of the same golden coin. The protagonist realizes that her power and the power of all the women in the harem lies precisely in this duality. They are the shadows that give the light its shape. By remaining invisible to the public eye, they preserve the sanctity and the mystery of the Sultan's private world, which is the ultimate source of his authority. To be seen is to be vulnerable. To be hidden is to be protected and, in a strange way, to be omnipresent. As the sun sets, casting a long, amber glow over the Bosphorus, the protagonist feels a deep sense of contentment with her place in this paradox. She is no longer the frightened girl who once sought to hide from the palace. She is now a woman who understands that the palace is hidden within her. The discipline, the patience, and the refined silence have become her truest self. She turns away from the window, her footsteps making no sound on the polished floor, and heads toward the evening prayer. The wedding is over, the empire is secure, and the quiet routine of the harem, the true heartbeat of the Topkapı, continues, steady and undisturbed. In the deepening twilight, she understands now that the most important things in this world are those that are never seen by the crowds. The strength of a stitch, the precision of a thought, the endurance of a heart, these are the hidden treasures of the harem. As she closes the door to her room, the click of the latch is the only sound in the corridor. She is invisible once more, tucked into the heart of the palace, but in that invisibility, she is entirely, perfectly herself. The return of the Sultan from the northern campaign is not marked by a sudden eruption of noise within the harem, but by a subtle, tectonic shift in the atmosphere, as if the very stones of the Topkapı have realigned themselves to a familiar, magnetic north. The protagonist, now a woman of modest status and established reputation, observes this change from the vantage point of the secondary, administrative offices where she now assists in the oversight of the novice training. The air, which for months had felt thin and expectant, suddenly grows dense with the sovereign's presence. The House of Felicity is no longer a world of women managing a void. It is once again a solar system revolving around a living sun. She finds herself reflecting on the nature of ambition, a concept that has changed shape for her as the years have layered themselves like fine glazes on a ceramic tile. In her youth, she had looked at the high galleries of the Cadans and the valid Sultan with a mixture of awe and a quiet, burning desire to rise, to be noticed, to be significant. But time has a way of tempering the flame of the ego. She has seen the cost of that highest ascent, the sleepless nights of the mothers of princes, the constant surveillance, the way a single frown from the Sultan can turn a life of luxury into a life of exile in the old palace. She has come to find a profound, steady dignity in her current station. She is an usta, a mistress of her craft and a guide to the young. Her status is modest, yet it is secure. She has traded the volatile heights of imperial favor for the enduring horizontal stability of the institution itself. Acceptance, she realizes, is not a defeat. It is a mastery of the reality one inhabits. This sense of acceptance is particularly poignant during the seasons of graduation. Every year, a group of women who have completed their years of service and reached a certain age are given their manumission papers, their kikima. For many, this transition does not mean a return to the unknown villages of their childhood, but a carefully orchestrated entry into the upper echelons of Ottoman society. The protagonist watches as her contemporaries, women she has studied and sewn with for over a decade, are prepared for their marriages to high-ranking officials, pashas and beys. These marriages are strategic alliances, a way for the Sultan to bind his administrators to the palace by giving them wives who are educated in the highest courtly manners and whose loyalties remain fundamentally tied to the harem. She assists in the preparation of a friend's departure, a woman named Dilara, who is to be wed to a provincial governor. As they pack the heavy chests with silks and furs, the conversation turns, as it rarely does, to the concept of freedom. To the world outside those high, whitewashed walls, the harem is the very definition of confinement. Yet, as Dilara looks at the gates she is about to pass through, there is a flicker of trepidation in her eyes. Within the harem, they have enjoyed a specific, structured liberty. They have been protected from the economic anxieties of the common world. They have been given an education that sets them apart from almost every other woman in the empire. They have lived in a world where their intellect and their artistic skills were the primary measures of their worth. Outside, Dilara whispers, her fingers tracing the carving on a sandalwood box. I will be the mistress of a house, but I will be alone in a way I have never been here. I will have the freedom to walk in a garden that is not guarded by eunuchs, but I will lose the sisterhood of the ward. I will be free from the rules of the Euster, but I will be subject to the whims of a husband I have never met. The protagonist realizes that freedom in the Ottoman world is a relative and multifaceted thing. For a woman of the harem, freedom outside often meant a transition into a different kind of structure, one that lacked the collective strength of the imperial household. Inside the harem, the confinement provided a space for a different kind of internal liberation, the freedom to master a language, to perfect a musical instrument, to participate in the quiet governance of an empire's heart. The walls were not just barriers. They were the boundaries of a specialized world where a woman could be a scholar, an administrator, or an artist. As she watches the carriage carry Dilara away through the middle gate, she understands that for many, leaving the harem is not an escape into the light, but a departure from a known and respected order into a world where their status would be far more precarious. She returns to her duties, walking through the long, tiled corridors that have become the landscape of her soul. She passes the novices in the courtyard, their faces still bright with the unformed ambitions of youth. She feels a quiet, maternal urge to tell them that the secret to a long life here is not to fight the walls, but to become the one who understands why the walls were built. She has learned to find beauty in the precision of the routine. The way the light hits the floor at the hour of the second prayer, the specific sound of the wind through the cypress trees, the taste of the first spring cherries from the palace gardens. These small, sensory certainties are the true currency of her contentment. The Sultan's return has brought a new series of ceremonies, but she views them now with a scholarly detachment. She sees the political theatre for what it is, a necessary maintenance of the imperial image. She no longer feels the need to be in the front row of the procession. She is content to be the one who ensures the lamps are filled and the accounts are balanced. There is a great power in being the one who keeps the machine running, the one who knows the history of every room and the temperament of every country. She has become a part of the palace's memory. As the evening settles over Istanbul, she finds herself in a small, elevated gallery that looks out over the rooftops of the harem toward the distant, shimmering line of the Bosphorus. The city is beginning to twinkle with thousands of small lights, a vast, breathing organism of noise and chaos. She reflects on the path that brought her here to the mountain village, the rocking ship, the first terrifying night in the ward. She thinks of the choices she made, and the choices that were made for her. In the harem, the line between destiny and choice is as thin as a thread of silk. Was it destiny that she was brought here, or was it her choice to embrace the discipline of the house that allowed her to survive? She realizes that choice, for her, has been the act of refinement. She could not choose her arrival, but she chose her response to it. She chose to learn, she chose to observe, and she chose to find a way to belong. The harem did not just happen to her. She happened to the harem. She has shaped her own small corner of this world through her patience and her restraint. Destiny provided the marble, but she provided the chisel. This introspection brings a profound sense of closure to her day. She is no longer a guest in the Sultan's house. She is a tenant of her own life. The walls of the Topkapı are no longer a cage, but a frame, a border that gives the picture of her life its shape and its meaning. Without the structure, she would be like the mist on the water, beautiful but formless. With the structure, she is a finished work of calligraphy. a poem written in the ink of experience on the polished paper of time. As she descends the stairs toward the evening meal, she feels the weight of her years as a source of strength rather than a burden. She has outlasted the storms of favor and the winters of uncertainty. She has found a way to be free within the heart of the most regulated household in the world. The harem is silent now, save for the distant, melodic call to prayer that floats over the battlements. It is a sound that speaks of surrender, but to her it speaks of arrival. She is where she is meant to be. The girl from the mountains is gone, and in her place is a woman of the palace, a mistress of the weight, a silent witness to the enduring grandeur of an empire. The shadows in the corridor are long and soft, welcoming her home. She has learned that life is not about the distance one travels across the earth, but the depth one reaches within the space they are given. As she enters the dining hall and takes her place among her peers, she feels the steady, comforting pulse of the harema rhythm that will continue long after she is gone, a timeless dance of stone and silk, of visibility and invisibility, of destiny and the quiet, persistent power of the human heart. The passage of years in the Topkapı is not measured by the ticking of a clock, but by the deepening of the patina on the brass braziers and the gradual softening of the once sharp edges of the Iznik tiles. The protagonist now moves through the corridors not with the quick, anxious step of a novice, nor the measured ambition of a middle-ranking Eusta, but with the slow, deliberate grace of a woman who has become part of the palace's very soul. Her hair, once as dark as the ink she used for her calligraphy, has become a fine, shimmering silver, tucked beneath a headscarf of pale grey silk. She is now one of the senior mothers of the house, a repository of memory in a world that often prioritizes the present. Her status is no longer a matter of rank or favor, but of presence. She is the one the younger Kalfas look to when a precedent must be recalled, or when the silence of a grieving girl in the ward becomes too heavy to bear alone as she sits by her favorite window in the late afternoon, watching the swallows dart between the chimneys of the palace kitchens. She finds herself reflecting on the vast distance between the reality she has lived and the myths that she knows float like distorted shadows in the world beyond the walls. She has heard the whispers of how the outside world imagines this place as a land of perpetual lavender-scented idleness, of chaotic luxury and sensational drama. She smiles at the thought, a small, tired movement of her lips. The reality was so much more rigorous, so much more human. The harem was not a fantasy. It was an institution of iron discipline and meticulous education. It was a place where a woman's mind was sharpened like a surgeon's blade, where her character was tempered in the fires of patience, and where her power was exercised through the subtle mastery of the unspoken word. It was a university of the soul, a bureaucracy of the domestic, and a fortress of the spirit. She thinks of the thousands of hours she spent over embroidery frames, the thousands of verses she committed to memory, and the thousands of times she lowered her gaze to show respect. These were not acts of submission, she realizes now, but acts of construction. They were the bricks and mortar of a self-possessed life. The harem did not take away her identity. It gave her a new one that was capable of navigating the most complex court in the world with absolute composure. She reflects on the girls she has trained, the hundreds of novices who arrived in tears and left as poised. Educated women, whether they stayed to manage the harem's treasuries or left to manage the great households of the empire. This, she knows, is her true legacy. Not the silver she saved or the robes she wore, but the transmission of a certain kind of dignity, a certain way of standing tall within the constraints of one's destiny. There had been talk of her leaving, of a retirement to a small, comfortable house in the Ayup district, provided by the Sultan's bounty as a reward for her decades of service. It is a tempting thought to see the sun set over the Golden Horn without the intervention of a wooden lattice, to walk in a garden where no eunuch stands guard at the gate. But as she looks at the familiar curve of the archway outside her door and hears the rhythmic splash of the fountain that has been the soundtrack to her life, she knows she will stay. The harem is not her prison. It is her home. She has become so attuned to its frequencies that the silence of the outside world might feel thin and lonely. Here she is known. Here every stone has a story she can read, and every shadow is an old friend. She spends her final hours of the day in the communal ward, not as a supervisor, but as a quiet presence. She watches the new novices' children, really struggling with their first Turkish verbs or their first embroidery stitches. She sees them looking at her with a mixture of awe and curiosity, wondering what it feels like to be so old, to have seen so many sultans come and go, to have outlived so many seasons of favor. She doesn't tell them that the secret to surviving the harem is simply to keep breathing, to keep learning, and to never let the walls grow taller than the mind. She simply reaches out and adjusts a girl's hand on her pen, her touch as light as a falling leaf. "Patience," she whispers. "The ink flows best when the hand is still." The sun begins its final descent, painting the sky over Istanbul in shades of burnt orange, violet, and gold. From her high vantage point, the protagonist watches the city prepare for the night. The minarets of the great mosques stand like silent sentinels against the fading light, and the Bosphorus turns into a ribbon of hammered silver. She reflects on the nature of history. The chroniclers will write of the sultans, the pashas, the battles won on the plains of Hungary or the sieges of distant Mediterranean islands. They will speak of the men who commanded armies and the viziers who signed treaties. But she knows that history is also made here, in these quiet, marble-lined rooms. It is made in the alliances formed over a cup of coffee, in the education of a prince who will one day rule an empire, and in the steady, disciplined lives of the women who kept the heart of the dynasty beating. History is not just a roar of cannons. It is also the rustle of silk and the scratching of a pen behind a carved wooden door. As the twilight deepens, she returns to her private quarters. The room is simple, reflecting her modest but respected status. There is her small library of bound volumes, her collection of fine wooden combs, and the small brazier that keeps the evening chill at bay. She performs her final prayers of the day, her movements slow and deliberate, a conversation with the divine that has become more intimate with every passing year. There is a profound sense of resolution in her heart. She has no regrets. She has lived the life that was laid out for her, and she has lived it with excellence. She has seen the grandeur and the tragedy, the rise and the fall, and through it all, she has remained herself. She walks to the window one last time. The moon has risen, a pale luminous orb that turns the palace into a world of silver and velvet. The marble floors of the courtyard below are cooling, releasing the last of the day's heat into the night air. The sound of the Bosphorus is a constant, low-frequency hum, a reminder of the world's persistence. The harem is settling into its nightly sleep, a collective inhalation of peace. The lamps are being dimmed, the guards are at their posts, and the thousands of women who inhabit this stone labyrinth are drifting into their dreams. She feels a great, soothing weightlessness. The ambitions and anxieties of her youth are gone, replaced by a vast, quiet space within her soul. She is like a ship that has finally reached its harbor after a long and eventful voyage. The anchors are down, the sails are furled, and the water is still. She realizes that her life has been a long study in the beauty of the contained. By accepting the boundaries of her world, she found a depth that she might never have discovered in the limitless chaos of the outside. She has found her freedom in the heart of her discipline. She lies down on her mattress, the familiar scent of lavender and old silk rising to meet her. The quilt is heavy and warm, a final embrace from the house that has protected her for so long. She listens to the silence of the palace, not an empty silence, but a full, rich quietude, laden with the memories of centuries. She thinks of the girls she has taught, the women she has loved, and the empire she has served in her own quiet way. She is a part of the stone, a part of the light, and a part of the history. The Bosphorus waters continue to lap against the sea walls, a rhythmic lullaby that speaks of the eternity of the tides. The moonlight rests on the lattice of her window, casting a pattern of silver stars across her floor. The protagonist closes her eyes, her breathing slowing to match the pulse of the sleeping palace. She is at rest, a senior daughter of the House of Felicity, a witness to the secret grandeur of a life lived behind the veil. The world continues its restless spinning, but here, in the heart of the Topkapı, there is only the peace of a journey completed. The history of the world is a tapestry of many threads, some gold, some silk, some rough wool. She has been one of the fine, hidden threads that held the pattern together, and as she drifts into a deep, dreamless sleep, she knows that the pattern is good. The rooms are quiet, the doors are secure, and the story of the Harem, story of human emotion, of discipline, and of a quiet, enduring power continues to unfold in the moonlight, one heartbeat at a time.